In the winter of 1925, as darkness swallowed the frozen landscape of Alaska, a small Siberian husky stood at the edge of an impossible journey. His breath formed clouds in air so cold it could freeze flesh in minutes. Behind him, a town of dying children. Ahead, 260 miles of the most treacherous terrain on Earth. His name was Togo, and this is the story of the greatest dog you've never heard of. Most people know the name Balto. The statue stands in Central Park, bronze and gleaming. The movies have been made, the books written, the legend told and retold. But history, as it often does, remembered the wrong hero. The real story, the true story, begins not at the finish line, but in the howling storms of Norton Sound, where a 12-year-old dog and his musher faced death with every step. This is a story of loyalty beyond measure, of courage that defied nature itself, of a bond between man and dog that would save an entire town and rewrite the meaning of heroism. Close your eyes. Let yourself drift back to Alaska, 1925. Feel the cold bite of the Arctic wind. Hear the crunch of snow beneath sled runners. Smell the wood smoke from distant cabins, and discover the truth about the dog who ran farther, faster, and braver than any other. This is Togo's story, a story of an unlikely hero, of impossible odds, and of a journey that should have killed them both. Let the snow fall gently around you as we travel back in time. Our story begins not with heroics but with disappointment. The year is 1913, and in the small mining town of Nome, Alaska, a Norwegian musher named Leonhard Seppala examines a tiny, squirming puppy from a new litter. Togo is small. Too small. His frame is slight, his legs seem too short, his demeanor restless and unruly. Seppala, one of the most respected dog mushers in all of Alaska, looks at this pup and sees nothing special. In fact, he sees a problem. This dog, he decides, will never make the team, so Seppala gives Togo away. Twice. But Togo had other plans. The first family who took him found him impossible to manage. He was hyperactive, destructive, constantly escaping. He chewed through ropes, dug under fences, refused to be contained. Within weeks, he was returned to Seppala. The second family tried harder to keep him, building stronger enclosures, watching him more carefully. But young Togo would have none of it. One morning, as Seppala prepared his team for a training run, Togo escaped again. The puppy raced through the frozen streets of Nome, his small legs pumping furiously, yelping and barking, desperate to catch up with the sled team as they departed. 6 miles. That's how far the puppy ran, leaping through snow drifts, stumbling but never stopping, refusing to give up. When Seppala finally noticed the commotion behind him and stopped his team, there was Togo, tongue hanging out, eyes bright with determination, collapsed in the snow but tail still wagging. Something in that moment changed. Seppala saw not a nuisance but a spirit that couldn't be broken, a fire that refused to be extinguished. He picked up the exhausted puppy, placed him in the sled, and brought him home. Maybe, he thought, this impossible dog deserved one more chance. Still, Togo was wild. He fought the harness like it was an enemy. He chewed through his restraints at night. He started fights with larger, stronger dogs, never backing down despite being outweighed. Other mushers told Seppala to give up on him. Some dogs, they said, are simply untrainable. Some spirits are too wild to be harnessed. But Seppala was patient. He was also stubborn. He'd been mushing dogs since he was a young man in Norway, and he recognized something in Togo that others missed. Yes, the dog was difficult. Yes, he challenged everything. But that fire, that relentless energy, that refusal to quit, those were exactly the qualities a lead dog needed. Slowly, over months and years, something remarkable emerged. Togo wasn't just trainable. He was extraordinary. His intelligence was uncanny. He seemed to understand complex commands after hearing them once. He could read Seppala's body language, his tone, even his mood. When Seppala was worried about trail conditions, Togo became more cautious. When they needed speed, Togo found reserves of energy that seemed impossible. His stamina was limitless. While other dogs tired after 20 or 30 miles, Togo seemed to grow stronger the longer they ran. 40 miles, 50 miles. He would finish a grueling day's journey and still be eager to continue. His courage was unshakable. Other dogs would balk at thin ice, at dangerous river crossings, at steep descents. Togo would test the ice carefully, find the safe path, and lead the team across without hesitation. By the time Togo was 2 years old, he was leading Sepala's team. By the time he was 5, he was legendary among mushers throughout Alaska. Stories spread about his abilities. The dog who could sense thin ice before it cracked. The dog who could navigate through whiteout blizzards when visibility was 0. The dog who seemed to know, instinctively, what his musher needed before Sepala even gave a command. Together, they won race after race. They hauled freight across impossible distances, through weather that kept other teams in their kennels. They traveled thousands of miles across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Sepala and Togo became, in the mushers' community, something approaching mythical. The man and dog who could go anywhere, survive anything, accomplish the impossible. Sepala loved all his dogs, but Togo was special. At night, Togo slept beside Sepala's bed. On rest days, he followed his musher everywhere, a constant shadow. Their bond went beyond training, beyond partnership. They understood each other in a way that transcended words. By 1925, Togo was 12 years old. In dog years, that made him elderly, well past the age when most sled dogs retire to easier lives. Sepala had been planning to breed him, to let him rest after more than a decade of service, to honor his contributions by giving him peace. But Togo's greatest test was still to come. It would arrive on a cold January day in 1925, not as a race, but as a matter of life and death. And when it came, Togo would prove that age is just a number when hearts are filled with purpose. Winter in Nome, Alaska, is not like winter elsewhere. The sun barely crests the horizon for a few hours each day, casting long shadows across endless white. Temperatures plunge to 40, 50, even 60 degrees below 0. The wind howls constantly, driving snow into every crack and crevice. The town, home to about 1,400 people, becomes isolated, cut off from the rest of the world. The harbor freezes solid, thick enough to walk on. No ships can reach them until spring. The only connection to the outside world is the Iditarod Trail, a treacherous path winding through hundreds of miles of wilderness, over mountains, across frozen rivers, through forests where wolves howl in the darkness. In January 1925, something terrible began to spread through Nome. It started quietly. A child, just 3 years old, experiencing a sore throat and fever. The parents weren't initially worried. Children got sick in winter, but within days the child was struggling to breathe, a grayish membrane forming in the throat. Within a week the child was dead. Then another child fell ill, and another, and another. Dr. Curtis Welch, the town's only physician, recognized the symptoms with growing horror. He'd seen this before in medical school, in textbooks, in his worst nightmares. Diphtheria. The word struck terror into every parent's heart. Diphtheria was a killer of children, a bacterial infection that created a thick coating in the throat and airways, slowly suffocating its victims. It spread through coughs and sneezes, through shared spaces, through the simple act of breathing. Without treatment, it had a mortality rate of 20% or higher, and in an isolated, crowded town like Nome, it could spread like wildfire. The treatment existed. An antitoxin serum developed years earlier could stop the disease if administered quickly enough. But it had to be fresh, properly stored, ready to use. Dr. Welch rushed to check his supplies. He had some serum, yes, but when he examined the dates, his heart sank. It was old, expired 5 years earlier, potentially useless. He tried it anyway, injecting the few cases he'd identified. Some children improved slightly. Others grew worse. As more children fell ill, as the death toll began to rise, as panic spread through the town, Dr. Welch knew what he had to do. He sent out a desperate message by telegraph, the wires humming with urgency across the frozen landscape. Nome needed serum, thousands of units, fresh and potent, immediately. Without it, they were looking at an epidemic that could kill hundreds of children, maybe more. The nearest substantial supply was in Anchorage, over 1,000 miles away. In summer, this might be manageable. Ships could sail. The journey, while long, was straightforward, but it was January. The harbor was frozen solid. The Bering Sea was impassable. What about airplanes? In 1925, aviation was still in its infancy. The planes available in Alaska were open-cockpit biplanes, barely more than wood and canvas. Flying in summer was dangerous. Flying in an Alaskan winter, in temperatures that could freeze fuel lines and make engines seize, was suicide. No pilot would attempt it. The only option was the railroad to Nenana, a small town 674 miles from Nome. And then someone would have to carry the serum the remaining distance. By dog sled, in the middle of an Alaskan winter, as temperatures hovered between 40 and 50 below zero, and weather reports warned of a massive storm gathering on the horizon. The governor of Alaska, facing an impossible situation, made the decision. A relay. 20 mushers with their dog teams spread out along the Iditarod Trail would pass the serum from team to team, racing against time, against the storm, against death itself. Each musher would run their section of trail, then hand off to the next, creating a chain of heroes stretching across the frozen wilderness. It was dangerous. It was desperate, but it was the only chance. Messages went out to mushers all along the trail. Some were veteran mail carriers who knew every mile of the route. Others were younger men, eager to help. All understood the stakes. All knew they might not survive. When Leonhard Seppala received the message in Nome, he didn't hesitate. He would take the longest, most dangerous leg of the journey. He would cross Norton Sound, a massive frozen bay known for its deadly conditions, where the ice was never fully trustworthy, where storms could appear in minutes. He would carry the serum through the heart of whatever weather came, and he would take his lead dog, his partner, his friend. Togo was 12 years old now. His muzzle had grayed. His joints ached on cold mornings. By all rights, he should be retired, resting by a warm fire. Seppala had planned to use a younger dog to lead this run, to spare Togo the hardship. But when Togo saw the harness come out, when he saw Seppala preparing the sled, when he smelled the excitement and urgency in the air, his eyes lit up with the same fire they'd had when he was a puppy chasing the team through the streets of Nome. He barked. He jumped. He demanded to be included. Seppala looked at his old friend and saw not an elderly dog but the same impossible spirit that had refused to give up 12 years earlier. How could he say no? Togo wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. On January 31st, 1925, as darkness settled over Nome and the first snowflakes of the coming storm began to fall, Seppala harnessed his team. 20 dogs, the best he had, each one strong and experienced. And at the front in the lead position stood Togo. The town gathered to see them off. Parents held their children close. Dr. Welch shook Seppala's hand, his eyes conveying what words couldn't. Everything depended on this. Everything. Seppala gave the command. The dogs leaned into their harnesses. The sled runners hissed against the snow. And they disappeared into the gathering storm. The cold hits immediately. 20 below zero, but the wind makes it feel far worse. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. Breath turns to ice on beards and scarves. The dog's fur frosts white, but they run. Togo sets the pace, steady and strong, and the rest of the team follows. The rhythm of their movement, the sound of their breathing, the crunch of paws on snow, it all becomes a meditation, a single focused purpose. Get the serum. Save the children, don't stop. They run through the day, through the night, mile after mile, 43 miles, 50 miles. The cold is unimaginable, but they don't stop. Seppala's hands grow numb even inside his thick mittens. His face is a mask of ice, but still they push forward. And then, As the second day dawns gray and ominous, the storm arrives in full force. Imagine darkness so complete you cannot see your hand in front of your face. Imagine wind so powerful it nearly knocks you off your feet with every gust, that drives snow horizontally like needles of ice. Imagine cold that burns your lungs with every breath, that makes your teeth ache, that turns your face numb within seconds, that makes exposed fingers useless inside thick gloves. This is what Togo and Sepala face as they push forward into the white abyss. The trail becomes invisible, buried under fresh snow, erased by the wind. Sepala can no longer see Togo at the front of the team, can barely see the dogs directly in front of the sled. He can only trust that his lead dog knows where to go, can only hope that 12 years of experience will be enough. And Togo does know. Through pure instinct, through years of running this country, through something almost supernatural, Togo navigates. He finds the trail when there is no trail. He senses firm ground beneath the snow. He avoids weak ice that would plunge them into freezing water. When Sepala second-guesses a direction, Togo pulls firmly the other way, and Sepala has learned to trust him completely. They pass other mushers on the trail, teams huddled in shelters, waiting for the storm to pass. The other drivers try to convince Sepala to stop, to wait, to rest, but he shakes his head. Children are dying. Every hour matters. They press on. On February 1st, after more than 80 brutal miles of travel through the storm, Sepala finally meets another musher, Henry Ivanov, at a roadhouse along the trail. Ivanov hands over the precious cargo with frozen, trembling hands. 20 pounds of serum, wrapped in fur to protect it from the cold, still frozen solid but hopefully not damaged. Sepala tucks it carefully into the sled. Now comes the hardest part, getting it back to Nome. And between Sepala and Nome lies Norton Sound. Norton Sound is not truly solid ice. It's a treacherous sheet that shifts with ocean currents and tides, riddled with pressure ridges where ice has buckled and piled high, pocked with weak spots that can give way without warning, striped with leads of open water that steam in the frigid air. Mushers avoid it when possible, going around the long way, following the coastline, adding days to the journey but staying relatively safe. But there is no time. The storm is worsening. The serum is warming in the relative heat of the sled, and if it thaws and refreezes improperly, it could become useless. Children are dying with every passing hour. Sepala makes the decision. They will cross Norton Sound. 43 miles of potentially deadly ice, straight across, the fastest route. At the front of the team, Togo leans into his harness. His ears are forward, his body tense. He seems to understand what's at stake. He seems to know that this is the moment everything has been building toward. They step onto the ice of Norton Sound. The storm howls around them with renewed fury. The ice groans beneath their weight, singing and cracking, a symphony of danger. Visibility is almost zero. Sepala can barely see the first few dogs. Everything beyond is white, an endless white void where sky and ground become one. But Togo presses forward, testing each step carefully, his weight distributed, his movements precise. Behind him the team follows, trusting completely. Hours pass. The crossing feels endless. Time loses meaning in the white darkness. There is only the movement forward, the cold, the wind, the trust between man and dog. At one point, they encounter a massive pressure ridge, a wall of ice blocks piled 15 feet high, stretching for miles in both directions like a frozen mountain range. There is no way around it within sight. Going back would waste precious hours they don't have. Togo examines the ridge, moving back and forth, searching. And then he finds it, a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a dog, where the ice blocks have fallen in just the right way to create a passage. He squeezes through. The next dogs follow. The sled catches on the ice, wedged between blocks. Sepala has to unhook it, push it, pull it, lift it over obstacles. The dogs strain against their harnesses, their claws scraping ice, their muscles trembling with effort. Slowly, painfully, they make it through the frozen maze. As they near the far side of the sound, as safety finally seems within reach, disaster strikes. The ice beneath them begins to crack. The sound is unmistakable, a deep groaning, a sharp report like a gunshot. The storm has weakened the ice, broken it apart. Behind them they can hear the grinding sound of ice floes colliding, the roar of water between them. Ahead, open water, dark and deadly, steaming in the cold air. They're trapped on an ice floe, drifting away from solid ground, out toward the open Bering Sea. Sepala looks around desperately, his heart pounding. The gap between their floe and solid ice is growing. 6 feet, 7 feet. Soon it will be too wide to cross. They'll drift into the sea and freeze to death, or the ice beneath them will break up completely and they'll plunge into water so cold it stops your heart in seconds. He needs to act now. But what can he do? The gap is growing. The dogs can't swim in this cold. The sled will sink. Togo at the front seems to assess the situation. Without waiting for a command, without hesitation, he makes a decision. He leaps. 12 years old, exhausted, half frozen, paws bleeding from the miles of ice. But Togo jumps across the gap, sailing through the air, landing on the far ice. The line goes taut. He immediately starts pulling, digging his claws in, using every ounce of his remaining strength. The other dogs see their leader and follow, jumping one by one, scrambling, desperate. The sled slides toward the edge. Sepala runs alongside it, then jumps with it, using his weight and momentum to help pull it across the gap. They crash onto solid ice, sprawling, gasping, but alive. For a moment they just lie there, breathing hard, feeling the solid ice beneath them. Then Togo shakes the snow from his fur, stands up and looks back at Sepala as if to say, "Are we going or not?" They keep moving forward. They cross Norton Sound in the middle of a deadly blizzard. 84 miles they've come from Nome. Now they must return, still racing against time, still fighting the storm. Togo's paws are bleeding, leaving small red stains in the snow. Ice has formed between his toes, cutting with every step. His body is pushed beyond any reasonable limit. His breathing is labored. But every time Sepala thinks about stopping, about letting the team rest, Togo pulls forward, refusing to quit, showing by example what true determination means. They run through the night, through the next day, another 78 miles across punishing terrain. By the time they reach the next musher, Charlie Olson, on February 2nd, Togo and his team have traveled 260 miles in 5.5 days, through the worst conditions Alaska has seen in years. It is the longest, hardest, most dangerous leg of the entire Serum Run. No other musher will come close to matching it. Sepala hands off the serum to Olson with frozen, trembling hands. The race continues. Team after team, musher after musher, the serum moves closer to Nome, passed like a sacred torch. But Togo's part is done. He has given everything he has and more. As they turn toward home, finally able to rest, Sepala kneels in the snow beside his lead dog. He removes his mittens, ignoring the cold, and runs his hands over Togo's frost-covered fur. "Good dog," he whispers, his voice breaking. "Good dog." Togo leans against him, too exhausted to even wag his tail, but his eyes say everything that needs to be said. On February 5th, 1925, 5.5 days after leaving Nenana, the serum reaches Nome. The final musher to carry it into town is a Norwegian named Gunnar Kassen, driving a team led by a dog named Balto. The children of Nome are saved. Dr. Welch administers the serum immediately, racing from house to house. The epidemic is stopped. Lives that would have been lost are saved. The world celebrates the miracle of the Serum Run, this impossible relay across the frozen north. And then history makes a mistake. Gunnar Kassen arrives in Nome in the early morning hours, when the town is still asleep. There are no crowds, no celebrations in that moment. But when the sun rises and people learn what has happened, that the serum has arrived, that their children will be saved, they swarm Kassen and his team. Photographs are taken. Balto, as the lead dog, is photographed again and again, his thick fur covered in frost, his steady gaze captured on film. The newspapers pick up the story. Within days, it spreads across America, then across the world. The heroic dash to save the children of Nome. The brave musher and his faithful dog, Balto. The story is simple, dramatic, perfect for headlines. By the time the full story comes out, by the time journalists learn about the relay, about the 20 teams, about the 674 miles divided among many mushers, the narrative has already been set. Balto is the hero. His image is everywhere. Statues are commissioned. A movie is planned. He becomes the most famous dog in America. Sepala and Togo arrive back in Nome exhausted, frostbitten, with bloody paws and frozen fur. They receive thanks from the town, heartfelt recognition from their fellow mushers who know what they accomplished. But the world's attention is elsewhere, focused on the dog who finished the race rather than the dog who ran the farthest. To be clear, Balto and Canine deserve recognition. They completed their leg of the journey in difficult conditions, running through the night when they could have stopped. Canine faced his own challenges, nearly losing the serum in the darkness, pushing through cold and fatigue. They earned their place in the story. But Balto ran 53 miles. Togo ran 260. Balto's section of trail, while cold and dark, avoided the worst of the storm. Togo crossed Norton Sound in a blizzard, survived drifting ice floes, navigated without visibility through the most treacherous terrain in Alaska. Leonhard Sepala, always a humble man, grew frustrated with the way the story was being told. He felt his faithful partner, his greatest dog, was being erased from history. He spoke to journalists, to anyone who would listen, trying to set the record straight. But changing a narrative once it's taken root is nearly impossible. The public had their hero. They had Balto. And that was that. Sepala took Togo and some of his other dogs on a tour across the United States, racing in exhibitions, showing people what these incredible animals could do. Togo was celebrated in mushing communities. Those who knew dogs, who understood what he had accomplished, who could appreciate the magnitude of 260 miles through a blizzard, they recognized his greatness. They knew the truth. In 1927, at the age of 14, Togo was retired. He lived with Sepala in Maine, where the couple had moved for work. Togo spent his final years in comfort, far from the frozen trails of Alaska, sleeping by the fire, taking gentle walks, living the peaceful life he had more than earned. Togo died on December 5, 1929, 16 years old, surrounded by the man who had believed in him when no one else did, who had seen something special in an impossible puppy all those years ago. Sepala was heartbroken. He had Togo's body preserved by a taxidermist and later donated to the Peabody Museum at Yale University, where it remains today. Those who visit can see him, this small dog, perfectly preserved, and try to imagine the immensity of what he achieved. Try to picture those 260 miles. Try to understand what it means to run until you can't run anymore and then run further still. Why does history remember Balto and forget Togo? Perhaps because we love a simple story, a single hero, a clean narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end. The truth is often more complicated, less convenient, harder to fit into a statue or a children's movie, but the truth deserves to be told. Togo was not perfect. He was difficult as a puppy. He fought and struggled and nearly washed out. But he became something extraordinary, not because he was born special, but because he refused to give up. Because he found a partner who believed in him. Because when the moment came, when everything was on the line, he ran farther and harder than any dog had the right to run. In 2019, almost a century after the Serum Run, a movie about Togo was finally released. Starring Willem Dafoe as Leonhard Sepala, it told the real story of the Serum Run, giving Togo his proper place in history. A new generation learned his name, learned what he did, learned that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we overlooked. Today, if you visit New York City, you can see the statue of Balto in Central Park. It's beautiful, it's deserved. The inscription reads, Endurance, fidelity, intelligence. Fine words for any sled dog. But perhaps while you're there, take a moment to think about Togo, about the dog who ran 260 miles through storms, about the hero who was forgotten but never gave up, even in memory. Because Togo's story is more than just a tale of one dog's journey. It's a reminder that true heroism isn't always celebrated, that the hardest work often goes unrecognized, that sometimes the greatest achievements happen in the darkness, witnessed only by the howling wind and the endless snow. It's a story about loyalty, about the bond between human and animal that transcends words, that survives impossible odds, that asks for nothing in return, about pushing beyond what seems possible because lives depend on it, because it's the right thing to do. Most of all, it's a story about a small, scrappy, impossible dog who refused to quit, who ran until his paws bled, who faced death with courage, who saved a town and asked for nothing in return except the chance to run beside his best friend one more time. In the frozen north of Alaska, on quiet winter nights, old mushers still tell stories around their fires. They speak of legendary dogs, of impossible journeys, of moments when everything hung in the balance and heroes emerged from unexpected places. And they speak of Togo, the dog who ran 260 miles through storms, the dog who saved Nome, the dog who deserved better from history but who wouldn't have cared either way. Because Togo didn't run for glory. He didn't run for statues or movies or recognition. He ran because his musher needed him to, because children were dying, because it was the right thing to do. He ran because that's what heroes do. Sleep well tonight, knowing that once in the frozen darkness of Alaska, when all seemed lost, a small dog with a huge heart showed us what true courage looks like. Rest easy, knowing that some heroes never ask for recognition. They simply do what needs to be done. And remember Togo, the greatest dog you never knew until now.